A homeless man living in a barrel just told the most powerful person on earth to get out of his way. Not with an army, not with a weapon, not with threats, with 6 words. And those 6 words humiliated a king in front of 30,000 soldiers, and somehow made that king respect the beggar more than any emperor he'd ever conquered. This isn't a feel-good story about believing in yourself. This is about the day the most powerful man in history realized he had less freedom than a man who owned absolutely nothing. How did a homeless philosopher defeat a world conqueror without lifting a finger? Stay with me, because by the end of this story, you're going to question everything you think you need to be happy. All right, so before we get to the barrel-dwelling philosopher who roasted an emperor, we need to understand who Alexander was. Because this wasn't just some regular king. This was Alexander the Third of Macedon. History would call him Alexander the Great. And here's the thing, that title wasn't given ironically. The man earned it. Alexander was born into royalty, sure. His father, Philip II, was the king of Macedon. But Philip wasn't satisfied with just being king. He wanted to unite all of Greece under his rule. And he was actually doing it, conquering city-state after city-state. Philip hired the smartest man in the world to tutor his son, Aristotle. Yes, that Aristotle, the philosopher, the guy who basically invented Western philosophy. So imagine being Alexander. You're 13 years old, and your teacher is literally Aristotle. And Aristotle is teaching you about ethics, logic, politics, warfare, and philosophy. But there's one lesson Aristotle tried to teach Alexander that didn't quite stick. He told him, "Alexander, there are 2 types of men in this world. Men who seek to conquer the world around them, and men who seek to conquer themselves. The second type is far rarer and far wiser." Alexander heard that and chose option 1. At age 16, his father left him in charge of Macedonia while Philip went off to war. 16. Most of us can't be trusted with a car. At 16, Alexander was trusted with an entire kingdom. And what did he do? He immediately led an army, crushed a rebellion, and founded his first city. At 16, by age 20, his father was assassinated, murdered at a wedding, stabbed by his own bodyguard. Historians still argue whether Alexander had something to do with it. We'll never know. But what we do know is this: 20-year-old Alexander became king. And the moment he took the throne, half of Greece saw an opportunity. They thought, he's just a kid. Let's rebel. Let's break free. Bad idea. Alexander moved so fast, so decisively, that within 2 years, he'd crushed every rebellion, secured Greece, and started looking around, asking, okay, what's next? And that became his life motto. What's next? At age 22, he invaded Persia. The Persian Empire, the largest empire the world had ever seen. Everyone said it was impossible. He did it anyway. At 25, he conquered Egypt. They made him Pharaoh, a living god. At 28, he pushed into India, defeated King Porus, and kept going until his own soldiers literally begged him to stop. They said, "Alexander, please, We've been marching for 8 years. We want to go home." And Alexander looked at them like they were insane. "Home? Why would we go home? There's more world out there. We haven't even reached the edge yet." His soldiers almost mutinied. They were exhausted. They'd been fighting non-stop for nearly a decade. Finally, Alexander agreed to turn back, not because he wanted to, but because his army was on the verge of collapse. So let's pause and take stock of what Alexander had accomplished by age 30. He'd conquered 3 continents, over 3 million square miles of territory. He'd defeated every army that stood against him. He never lost a single battle, not one. He had wealth beyond imagination: gold, palaces, tributes from dozens of nations. He had power, absolute power. Kings bowed to him. Nations surrendered at the mention of his name. He had glory. Songs were written about him. Legends spread faster than his armies. He had everything a human being could possibly want. And he was miserable. Because here's what nobody tells you about conquering the world: it's never enough. You conquer one nation, and before the celebration is over, you're already thinking about the next one. You defeat one enemy, and immediately you're asking, "Who's next? Who else can I fight?" Alexander had spent his entire life chasing more territory, more glory, more victories, more everything. And it still wasn't enough. He would lie awake at night, staring at maps, planning the next campaign. His advisors would beg him to rest, to enjoy what he'd built. And he'd look at them like they were speaking a foreign language. Rest? For what? "I haven't finished yet." Finished what, Your Majesty? Everything. That's who Alexander was. A man who had everything and felt like he had nothing. A man enslaved by his own ambition. And then someone told him about a man living in Corinth, a philosopher, a beggar, a madman, depending on who you asked. A man who owned nothing, feared nothing, wanted nothing. And supposedly, this man was truly free. Alexander had conquered emperors and kings, but he'd never met someone who genuinely didn't care that he existed, someone who couldn't be impressed, couldn't be bought, couldn't be conquered. So Alexander decided he needed to meet this person, not to conquer him, to understand him. Because maybe, just maybe, this homeless philosopher had something Alexander didn't. Freedom. All right, let's talk about Diogenes. Diogenes of Sinope. If Alexander was the most powerful man in the world, Diogenes was the man who gave the least amount of concern about power that has ever been documented in human history. This man was legendary, not for what he accomplished, but for what he refused to care about. Let me paint you a picture of his life. He lived in a pythos, a large ceramic storage jar, like a wine barrel, but bigger. That was his home, not an apartment, not a house, a barrel, in the middle of the marketplace in Athens, and later, Corinth. He owned exactly 3 things: one cloak, one walking stick, one wooden bowl for drinking water. That's it. That was his entire net worth. Until one day he saw a child drinking water by cupping his hands. And Diogenes looked at his wooden bowl, looked at the child, and said, "This child has bested me in simplicity," and he threw the bowl away. Let me repeat that. He got rid of his only possession because a kid showed him you don't even need that. My man was out here getting out-minimalized by children and taking it as a personal challenge. But Diogenes wasn't just some homeless guy who lost his mind. He was one of the most brilliant philosophers of ancient Greece. He founded a school of philosophy called Cynicism. Now, when we say cynicism today, we usually mean someone who's negative or doesn't trust people. But Cynic philosophy was different. It basically said this: true freedom and happiness come from living in accordance with nature, rejecting artificial social conventions, and needing absolutely nothing from anyone. Diogenes took this philosophy very seriously. Like, very seriously. To the point where he made it his life's mission to demonstrate it in the most outrageous ways possible. For example, he would walk through the marketplace of Athens in broad daylight, carrying a lit lantern, holding it up to people's faces. People would stop him and ask, "Diogenes, what are you doing? It's the middle of the day." And he'd say, "I'm looking for an honest man." And then he'd shine the light in their face, shake his head sadly, and keep walking. Imagine going to the grocery store today, and some guy with a flashlight walks up to you, shines it directly in your eyes, goes, "Nope," and walks away. That was Diogenes, every single day. And people couldn't even get mad at him because he'd already made it clear he didn't care what they thought. Here's another famous story. The philosopher Plato, student of Socrates, teacher of Aristotle, one of the most respected minds in history, was giving a lecture at his academy. Very prestigious, very intellectual. And someone asked him, "Plato, how do you define a human being?" Plato thought about it and said, "A human is a featherless biped, meaning a two-legged creature without feathers. Technically accurate, very philosophical." Everyone nodded thoughtfully. Diogenes heard about this definition, and he went and found a chicken, plucked every single feather off of it, walked into Plato's academy. Mid-lecture, full class of students, held up this naked, confused chicken and yelled, "Behold, I have brought you a man." And then he just left, dropped the chicken, and walked out. Plato had to change his entire definition of humanity because Diogenes showed up with poultry. The next day, Plato revised it to, "A human is a featherless biped with broad, flat nails." Diogenes had successfully trolled one of history's greatest philosophers with a chicken. And this wasn't a one-time thing. Diogenes had a personal vendetta against Plato. See, Plato was a student of Socrates, who preached simple living and virtue. But Plato himself lived in a nice house, wore fine clothes, ate well, enjoyed the comforts of life. And Diogenes saw this as hypocrisy. One time, Plato was giving a lecture about his theory of forms, his idea that there's a perfect, ideal version of everything that exists in a higher realm. He said, there is an ideal table, an ideal chair, an ideal version of every object. Diogenes interrupted. "Plato, I can see the table, I can see the chair. But where is this ideal table? Where is this ideal chair?" "I don't see them," Plato responded, annoyed. "That's because you have eyes to see the physical table, but you lack the intellect to perceive the ideal." Diogenes replied, "And you have the intellect to imagine things that don't exist, but you lack the sense to see what's right in front of you. Plato was furious. He called Diogenes Socrates gone mad. Diogenes took it as a compliment. But here's where Diogenes gets really interesting and really shocking by ancient standards. He had absolutely zero shame, none, not even a little bit. In ancient Greece, there were very strict social rules about behavior, what you could do in public, what you had to do in private. Diogenes ignored all of it. He ate in the marketplace, which was considered vulgar. He slept in public, improper. He urinated in public, scandalous. He even pleasured himself in public. Yes, really. When people confronted him about it, he said, "I wish I could satisfy my hunger by rubbing my belly." The point he was making was this: why is one natural bodily function acceptable in public and another isn't? They're both just nature. Now, we don't have to agree with his methods, but you have to admit, the man committed to his philosophy. People were so offended by his shamelessness that they started calling him dog. In ancient Greece, calling someone a dog was a serious insult. It meant you were shameless, dirty, beneath human standards. And Diogenes, he owned it. He said, "Yes, I am a dog, and you should be more like dogs." People were like, "What? Why would we want to be like dogs?" He said, "Dogs are honest. They don't pretend to be something they're not. When a dog is hungry, it eats. When it's tired, it sleeps. When it's happy, it shows it. When it's angry, it shows that too. You humans, you lie constantly. You hide your true nature. You put on masks for each other. You pretend to be virtuous while secretly being selfish. You're slaves to your reputations, your possessions, your social status. A dog is free. You are not." And that's when people started to realize Diogenes wasn't crazy. He was making a point. See, Diogenes believed that humans had overcomplicated life to the point of misery. We'd created all these artificial needs, nice houses, fine clothes, social status, reputation, wealth, power. And then we spent our entire lives chasing these things, convinced we needed them to be happy. But Diogenes looked around and said, "Do you actually need any of that? Or have you just been told that you need it?" He tested this by getting rid of everything. And he discovered something. He didn't need any of it. He needed food. He could get that easily, bread and water, maybe some onions. He needed shelter from extreme weather. A barrel worked fine. He needed clothing. One cloak was enough. Everything else, unnecessary. And once he realized he didn't need all that extra stuff, he was free. People would try to help him. Wealthy citizens would offer him money, a place to stay, a proper job. He'd turn them all down. "Why?" they'd ask. "Don't you want a better life?" He'd say, "Better than what? I have everything I need. The sun is warm. I have food. I have time to think. What could you possibly offer me that would improve on this?" And they couldn't answer, because Diogenes had discovered something most people never figure out. If you don't need anything from anyone, no one has power over you. You're free, truly free, not free in the sense of I have money so I can buy what I want. Free in the sense of I want nothing, so nothing controls me. People would insult him, mock him, call him names. He didn't care. Why would he? Their opinions didn't feed him, didn't shelter him, didn't matter to his happiness at all. People would threaten him. He didn't care. What were they going to do? Take his stuff? He had nothing. Ruin his reputation? He had none. Kill him? He'd already accepted death as natural and inevitable. There was nothing you could do to Diogenes. He'd already let go of everything you could threaten him with, and that made him the most powerful person in any room. Not because he had anything, but because he needed nothing. So word about this guy started spreading. There's a philosopher in Athens, now he's in Corinth, who lives in a barrel and can't be intimidated by anyone. Doesn't matter if you're rich, powerful, famous, he doesn't care. He's actually free. And eventually, that word reached someone very, very interested in what freedom actually means. Alexander the Great. The man who had everything but felt like he had nothing, was about to meet the man who had nothing but was truly content. This was going to be interesting. So Alexander decides he's going to Corinth. Not to conquer it, he already owns it. Corinth is part of his empire. He's going specifically to meet this one weird guy who supposedly can't be impressed. Now, imagine the optics of this. Alexander the Great, King of Kings, conqueror of the known world, is personally traveling with thousands of soldiers to talk to a homeless man. His generals probably thought he'd lost his mind. Your Majesty, we have nations to conquer, empires to administer, and you want to visit a beggar? And Alexander probably said something like, I've met 1,000 kings. They all want something from me. I want to meet one person who wants nothing. So they arrive in Corinth. Alexander sends his soldiers to find Diogenes. Search the city. Find the philosopher who lives in a barrel. Bring me to him. They search the marketplace. Not there. The temples. Not there. The residential areas. Not there. Finally, someone says, I saw him outside the city walls this morning. So Alexander and his entire entourage, we're talking thousands of soldiers, generals, advisors, the full royal parade, march outside the city. And they find him, Diogenes, lying on the ground, in the dirt, sunbathing, not teaching, not meditating, not preparing for the arrival of the most powerful man on earth, just lying there, eyes closed, soaking up the sun, completely relaxed. Now, let's really visualize this scene because the contrast is absurd. On one side, Alexander the Great, polished bronze armor, gleaming in the sun, royal purple cloak, the most expensive dye in the world, crown on his head, perfectly groomed, battle-hardened, powerful presence. Behind him, 30,000 soldiers in formation, the most disciplined, feared military force on the planet. Every single one of them would die for Alexander without hesitation. Generals with decades of experience, advisors, attendants, royal guards, banners flying, horses stamping, the entire spectacle of imperial power on display, and 10 feet away, an old man, filthy, covered in dust and grime, wearing rags that probably hadn't been washed in months, hair wild and unkempt, beard tangled, lying in literal dirt, the most powerful military force in human history versus one homeless dude taking a nap. The soldiers announce in their most official, commanding voices, Diogenes of Sinope, Alexander the Great, King of Macedon, conqueror of Persia, Pharaoh of Egypt, Lord of Asia, wishes to speak with you. Diogenes cracks open one eye, looks at them, looks at the entire army, looks at Alexander, and closes his eye again, goes right back to sunbathing. The generals are stunned. The soldiers are shocked. Some of them reach for their weapons. You have to understand, this is unprecedented. When Alexander the Great shows up, people prostrate themselves. They fall on their faces. They tremble. Kings have surrendered their entire kingdoms without a fight just because Alexander showed up. And this homeless guy just ignored him, treated him like he was a cloud blocking the sun. One of the generals steps forward, furious, hand on his sword. "How dare you disrespect?" Alexander holds up his hand, stops him, because Alexander isn't angry. He's fascinated. This is the first person he's met in years, maybe ever, who isn't terrified of him, who doesn't want anything from him, who treats him like he's nothing special, and instead of being offended, Alexander is intrigued. Alexander walks forward, stands directly over Diogenes. His shadow falls across the philosopher's face, blocking the sunlight, and Alexander speaks, not in a commanding voice, not angry, almost respectfully. He says, "I am Alexander, son of Philip, king of Macedon, hegemon of the Hellenic League, Shahanshah of Persia, pharaoh of Egypt, lord of Asia, conqueror of the known world. They call me the Great." Diogenes opens his eyes, looks up at this king of kings, this man who has just listed every title, every achievement, every reason why he's the most important person on the planet. And Diogenes says, and I am Diogenes the dog." The crowd gasps, literally gasps, because calling yourself a dog was an insult, a degradation. It meant you were admitting you were worthless, shameless, beneath everyone. But Diogenes says it like it's a title he's proud of. Like he's saying, "You're Alexander the Great. Cool, I'm Diogenes the dog. We all have our titles." One of the generals mutters, "This man is insane." But Alexander smiles, because he gets it. Diogenes isn't being disrespectful. He's being honest. He's saying, "Your titles don't mean anything to me. Your power doesn't impress me. You're a human being, and so am I. That's all that matters." And Alexander has never heard anyone talk to him like that, ever. So Alexander decides to do something he almost never does. He makes an offer. Alexander says, "Diogenes, I have heard of your wisdom. I have heard of your philosophy. I respect your way of life, unconventional though it may be. I am the most powerful man in the world, and I am offering you something I offer very few people. Ask me for anything, anything at all, and if it is within my power, and nearly everything is within my power, I will grant it to you." Think about what's being offered here. The richest man in the world is given a blank check to a homeless guy. Gold? Done. Alexander could give him more gold than he could spend in 10 lifetimes. Land? Absolutely. Here's a province. It's yours. A palace? Pick a city. I'll build you one. A title? You're now an advisor to the king. Congratulations. An army? You want soldiers? How many? Anything. Literally anything. The most powerful man on earth is standing there saying, "Name it, and it's yours." The crowd leans in. This is it. This is the moment every person dreams about. The ultimate offer. the chance to become instantly wealthy and powerful. Some people in the crowd are probably thinking, ask for gold, ask for a house, ask for land. This is your chance. Diogenes looks at Alexander, really looks at him, takes in the armor, the crown, the soldiers, the power, and then he looks at the sun, the warm sun on his face that Alexander is currently blocking, and Diogenes says, "Yes, I do have a request." The crowd holds its breath. Alexander nods. "Name it." Diogenes says, "Stand out of my sunlight. Stand out of my sunlight." The most powerful man in the world just offered this beggar anything he could possibly want. Gold, land, power, influence, luxury, comfort, status. And Diogenes' response is, "You're blocking my sun. Move." Not "no thank you," not "I don't need anything," just, "Yeah, actually, you're in my way. Could you step aside?" The man treated the offer of infinite wealth the same way you'd treat someone standing in front of your TV. "Hey, can you move? I'm trying to see." So? The generals are furious now. Some of them draw their swords. "How dare you? This is treason. This is—" Alexander raises his hand again, stops them, because he's not angry, he's stunned. He stands there staring at Diogenes, trying to process what just happened. This man just turned down literally everything Alexander has to offer. Not because he was being polite, not because he was scared, but because he genuinely, truly, honestly didn't want any of it. He valued sunlight more than an empire. And in that moment, Alexander understood something he'd never fully grasped before. Diogenes was free in a way Alexander would never be. Alexander owned half the world, but he was still a slave. Slave to ambition, slave to conquest, slave to the need for more, more, more. Diogenes owned nothing, and he was completely, totally, utterly free. Alexander stands there for a long moment, just looking at this man lying in the dirt, this man who has nothing, this man who wants nothing, this man who can't be conquered because there's nothing to conquer. And then Alexander says something that would be quoted for the next 2,000 years. He says it quietly, almost to himself, but everyone hears it. He says, "If I were not Alexander, I would wish to be Diogenes. If I were not Alexander, I would wish to be Diogenes." The most powerful man in the world, openly admitting he envies a homeless beggar, because that beggar has something Alexander doesn't, something Alexander can't conquer, something Alexander can't buy, something Alexander might never have. Peace, contentment, freedom. And then Alexander turns and walks away. His generals follow, confused and frustrated. "Your Majesty, that man disrespected you. We should—" Alexander cuts them off. "Leave him alone. He's richer than I'll ever be. And Diogenes?" He adjusts his position slightly, now that Alexander's shadow is gone, and goes right back to sunbathing, like nothing happened, because to him, nothing did. The most significant political figure in human history just walked away from him. And Diogenes didn't care, because the sun was warm, and that was enough. Okay, so that's a great story. Ancient king meets homeless philosopher. Philosophical showdown. Dramatic ending. But here's the real question. What does a 2,300-year-old story about a king and a beggar have to do with your life right now? Everything. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. We're all Alexander. Every single one of us. We're chasing the next thing, the next promotion, the next raise, the next achievement, the next level, the bigger house, the nicer car, the better vacation, the more followers, the more likes, the more respect. We tell ourselves, once I get that, then I'll be happy. Once I make 6 figures, then I'll be satisfied. Once I get that promotion, then I'll relax. Once I have 1,000,000 followers, then I'll feel successful. Once I buy that house, then I'll be content. And then we get it. And we're happy for, what, a week? A month? And then we're looking at the next thing. Okay, now I need to make 7 figures. Now I need the executive position. Now I need 10 million followers. Now I need a bigger house. It never ends. The goalpost keeps moving. We're on a treadmill, running faster and faster, accomplishing more and more, and somehow still feeling empty. That was Alexander. He conquered the entire known world by age 30, and he still wanted more. He'd stand on a beach looking out at the ocean, and his generals would say, "Your Majesty, you've done it. You've conquered everything." And Alexander would point at the horizon and say, "But what's beyond that? There must be more." See, here's what we don't understand about desire. It's insatiable. You feed it, and it gets hungrier. You satisfy one desire, and 3 more appear. The Buddhists figured this out 2,500 years ago. They called it tanha, the thirst that can't be quenched. The Stoics figured it out too. Seneca wrote about it constantly. How the more you have, the more you want. How wealth doesn't satisfy greed, it inflames it. And Diogenes, he figured out the solution. Stop feeding the beast. Diogenes realized something radical. If you can eliminate your desires, you eliminate your suffering. Now, that doesn't mean want nothing ever. It means don't need anything external to be happy. There's a difference between preference and attachment. Diogenes would eat good food if it was offered, but he didn't need it to be happy. He'd appreciate a comfortable place to sleep, but his happiness didn't depend on it. He enjoyed intellectual conversation, but he was fine being alone. He had preferences, but he wasn't attached to any of them. And that made him free. Because think about what attachment does to you. When you need something to be happy, you become a slave to that thing. You need money to be happy? Now you're enslaved to your job. You can't leave. You can't take risks. You can't say no to your boss, even when they're wrong, because you need the paycheck. You need status to be happy. Now you're enslaved to other people's opinions. You can't be authentic. You can't be vulnerable. You have to maintain an image constantly. You need a relationship to be happy. Now you're enslaved to that person. You'll tolerate bad behavior. You'll compromise your values. You'll lose yourself trying to keep them. You need success to be happy. Now you're enslaved to outcomes you can't always control. One failure and your entire identity crumbles. Every attachment is a chain. Every "I need this to be happy" is a prison cell. And Diogenes looked at all of it and said, "What if I just let go? What if I don't need a nice house? What if I don't need people's approval? What if I don't need wealth or status or comfort? What if I just live? Eat when I'm hungry, sleep when I'm tired, think when I'm curious, enjoy the sun when it's shining, enjoy conversation when it's available, enjoy simplicity. And when those things aren't available, that's fine too. See, here's what we don't realize. Most of our stress, anxiety, and unhappiness comes from attachment. We're stressed because we're attached to outcomes we can't control. We're anxious because we're attached to other people's opinions. We're unhappy because we're attached to things we don't have yet. And the modern world has figured out how to exploit this. Advertising works by creating attachment. You need this car to be successful. You need this skincare product to be attractive. You need this course to be fulfilled. Social media works by creating attachment. You need more followers to matter. You need more likes to be validated. You need to keep up with everyone else to be relevant. Hustle culture works by creating attachment. You need to work 80 hours a week to be valuable. You need to sacrifice everything for success. You need to achieve more, be more, do more, and we buy into it. We internalize these needs, and then we spend our entire lives chasing things we were told to want. And that's why Diogenes matters, because he's proof that you can just opt out. You don't have to play the game. You don't have to chase the things everyone says you should chase. You don't have to need what they say you need. You can decide for yourself what actually matters. And here's what Diogenes discovered. The things that actually make life worth living, they're free. Sunlight, fresh air, good conversation, laughter, learning, thinking, simple food when you're hungry, water when you're thirsty, rest when you're tired, the ability to think clearly, the ability to be present, the ability to appreciate what you have right now instead of obsessing over what you don't have yet. Those are the things Diogenes valued, and none of them cost anything. None of them required achievement. None of them required approval. They were just there, available to anyone who paid attention. Now, I'm not saying you should throw away all your possessions and live in a barrel. That's not the point. The point is this: examine what you actually need versus what you've been told to need. You probably need shelter, but do you need a mansion? You probably need food, but do you need expensive restaurants every night? You probably need clothing, but do you need a closet full of designer brands? You probably need some money. But do you need to be rich? You probably want respect, but do you need everyone's approval? You probably want success, but do you need to be famous? You probably want companionship, but do you need to be in a relationship to be happy? Start asking, what am I chasing that I don't actually need? Because every unnecessary desire is a weight you're carrying. Every I need this to be happy is a limitation on your freedom. Alexander had everything: wealth beyond measure, power beyond limit, glory beyond imagination. And he was enslaved by the need for more, enslaved by ambition, enslaved by the fear of being forgotten. Diogenes had nothing: one cloak, one stick, a barrel, and he was free. Free to think whatever he wanted, free to say whatever he wanted, free to live however he wanted, free from fear, free from anxiety, free from the need to impress anyone. So here's the uncomfortable question: what's blocking your sunlight? What are you chasing that's preventing you from enjoying what you already have? What do you think you need that's actually just getting in the way? Maybe it's the career you're killing yourself for, thinking, once I reach the top, then I'll relax. But you know you won't. Maybe it's the material possessions you're accumulating, thinking, once I have enough stuff, then I'll be satisfied. But there's never enough. Maybe it's the approval you're seeking, thinking once everyone respects me, then I'll feel worthy. But their opinions keep changing. What if you just stopped? What if you stepped back and asked, what do I actually enjoy right now with what I already have? Not what will I enjoy once I achieve X. Not what will make me happy in the future, but what's already here that I'm too busy to notice, because the sun is still shining. It was shining 2,300 years ago when Diogenes lay in the dirt. It's shining today. And all the achievement, all the wealth, all the success in the world can't make it shine brighter. But you can block it. You can stand in your own light, chasing shadows, and never even notice the sun is there. That's what Alexander was doing, standing in Diogenes' sunlight. And Diogenes, in the gentlest way possible, told him, move. So what happened after that meeting? Did Alexander change? Did that retry a continue encounter with Diogenes transform him? No, not really. He understood what Diogenes was saying. He respected it. He even envied it. But he couldn't let go. Alexander went back to conquering, back to the campaigns, back to the wars, back to the endless pursuit of more. He pushed his army further into India. His soldiers begged him to stop. They'd been marching for nearly a decade. They wanted to go home. Alexander saw their exhaustion, saw their desperation, and reluctantly agreed to turn back. But even on the journey home, he couldn't stop. He fought more battles, took more cities, planned more campaigns. Some historians say his personality changed in those final years. He became more paranoid, more ruthless, more isolated. The weight of empire was crushing him, but he couldn't put it down. And then, in 323 BC, at age 32, Alexander died. Some say it was malaria. Some say typhoid fever. Some say poison. We'll never know for sure. But here's what we do know. He died young, exhausted, far from home. His empire, everything he'd spent his life building, immediately fell apart after his death. His generals fought each other for pieces of it. Within a generation, it was fragmented and destroyed. Alexander conquered the world and died with nothing he could take with him. All those battles, all that glory, all that territory, gone. Diogenes, he lived into his 90s. He spent his days thinking, talking, teaching, and sunbathing. He never owned anything. He never achieved anything by society's standards. He never built an empire or conquered a nation or accumulated wealth. And he died on the exact same day as Alexander. June 10th, 323 BC, the same day, the emperor and the beggar both returned to dust. When Alexander died, there was chaos, fighting, grief, political turmoil. When Diogenes died, his students gathered around him and asked, "Master, how would you like to be buried?" Diogenes said, "Throw me outside the city walls. Let the animals have my body." They were horrified. "But Master, dogs will eat you. Wild animals will—" Diogenes interrupted. "Then leave a stick next to me so I can defend myself." They said, but you'll be dead. How will you use the stick?" Diogenes smiled and said, "Exactly. I'll be dead. So why should I care what happens to my body?" Even in death, Diogenes was free. Free from fear, free from attachment, free from the need to control what he couldn't control. He lived free, and he died free. Meanwhile, Alexander, who spent his entire life trying to be immortal through glory, was forgotten by most people within a few generations. His empire crumbled. His name was remembered, but his dream died with him. But Diogenes, his philosophy spread. The Cynics influenced the Stoics. The Stoics influenced Christianity, Buddhism, and nearly every major philosophical tradition that followed. Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor, was essentially trying to live like Diogenes while ruling an empire. Seneca, one of the richest men in Rome, constantly wrote about how wealth was meaningless compared to inner freedom. Diogenes' central teaching. Epictetus, who we'll talk about in another video, was enslaved and tortured, but found freedom through philosophy, through ideas that trace back to Diogenes. So, in a strange way, Diogenes conquered the world too, not with armies, with an idea. The idea that freedom comes from within, that you don't need anything external to be happy, that the richest person isn't the one who has the most, but the one who needs the least. And that idea? It's still alive today, 2,300 years later. So let's come back to where we started. A homeless man living in a barrel told the most powerful person on earth to get out of his way. And in that moment, the beggar won. Not because he was smarter, not because he was stronger, but because he was free. And Alexander knew it. Standing there, looking down at Diogenes, Alexander realized, this man has something I'll never have. Peace, contentment, freedom from the endless pursuit. So here's my final question for you. What's your barrel? I don't mean literally living in a barrel. I mean, what's the minimum you actually need to be happy? Because once you figure that out, everything else becomes optional. And when things are optional, they can't control you anymore. You might still want them, that's fine, but you don't need them. And that small shift from I need this to I'd like this, but I'm fine without it, that's the difference between slavery and freedom. Diogenes figured this out 2,300 years ago. You can figure it out today. What's blocking your sunlight? What are you chasing that's keeping you from appreciating what's already here? The sun is shining right now, but you can't feel it if you're too busy running towards something else. So here's what I want you to do. Drop a comment below and tell me in one sentence what you're chasing that might be getting in your way. Just one sentence. Be honest. Maybe it's money. Maybe it's status. Maybe it's approval. Maybe it's perfection. Whatever it is, name it. Because the first step to freedom is recognizing what's holding you back. And if this story made you think differently about success, happiness, or freedom, hit that subscribe button. Turn on notifications. Because we're going deep into ancient wisdom that the modern world desperately needs.